those goals. Now, returning to tonight's debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, a moment that could prove pivotal in their battle for the White House. My colleagues Yalda Hakim and Mark Austin will bring you a special Sky News programme from midnight. Evening to both of you.
Evening, Anna. And as you say, the first debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And Mark, we know what happened last time. I mean, these debates are consequential.
Yes.
When Joe Biden stood across or next to Donald Trump, I mean, he was pushed out.
Yes, he was. I mean, it could be a big moment. And it's interesting because we've both been to conventions. You at the Republican one, I went to the Democrat convention. And this was razzmatazz, this was entertainment, this was showbiz. And at the end, the leaders were sort of cheered to the rafters. This is, in a way, when it gets real, you know, face-to-face, head-to-head, potentially make or break.
And the polls show that Americans don't just want the entertainment. They don't want the greatest show on earth. No. They want actual policy. They want to know who Kamala Harris is. And I think that the big challenge for Kamala Harris is to tell the American people who she is before Donald Trump does.
Right. So huge jeopardy for both candidates, Anna. And we will be live from midnight with a Sky News special programme, coverage of the debate. So if you can, do stay up for us.
Mark, Yalda, thank you. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, joined by the CEO of Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha. Great to see both of you. And certainly among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the eye, the headline, Starmer and Reeves to push ahead with cuts after facing down rebel MPs. That and plenty more after this break.
day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. In an interview with Sky News while in London, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said he won't rule out sending long-range ballistic missiles to Ukraine to strike deeper into Russia. More than 1,700 inmates have been released early to ease prison overcrowding in England and Wales. And White House rivals Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are preparing for their first and potentially only televised debate tonight ahead of November's election. Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the CEO of Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha. How hard can it be? So let's take a look at the front pages then, shall we? Starting with the Eye, reports that having pushed cuts to winter fuel payments through Parliament, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are now poised to introduce further controversial proposals on tax and spending. The Guardian leads on the story too, reporting the Prime Minister is facing calls to aid the poorest after the new cuts have been approved. Daily Express reports on campaigners against the measures, saying united we stand in winter fuel fight. The Telegraph's headline, President poised to lift Ukraine missile ban. The Metro carries reaction from former chat show host Jeremy Kyle to the coroner's inquest into treatment of guests on his programme. He says it's taken a huge toll on him. The Financial Times reports that the European Court of Justice has ordered Apple to pay €13 billion in back taxes to the Irish government. The Mirror hears that BBC staff working on Strictly Come Dancing were forced to hand over their phones as part of an investigation into alleged backstage misconduct. Daily Star asks, will fans get the happy ending they crave as the final episode of Gavin and Stacey is filmed? A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Mark and to Sonia. Welcome to both of you. Big domestic stories today. I was wondering if this was the most challenging day yet for Sir Keir Starmer and his Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Mark, what do you think after the vote in the Commons on winter fuel and, of course, the prisoners' release?
Yes, and this vote, there is something the government have chosen to do, is really their first serious hurdle. And yes, they won the vote. They won it hands down. They were always going to win the vote because they've got about 4 million MPs. And they can afford, to some extent, in arithmetic terms, to like the Red Army, you basically got what you lack in strategic...
Did you say Red Army?
Yes, what you lack in strategic opportunity. You can kind of have a human wave of MPs and throw them at the problem. So that was never in doubt. But this doesn't mean it's not an issue for the government. I mean, the fact is that this is about austerity. This is the first vote, effectively, the first trial moment for the new government's austerity programme. And that's going to split into, as George Osborne's austerity did, tax rises, which are a form of austerity, and spending cuts. We don't know what their mix is going to be. We'll find out in the budget. But there's going to be a lot more of this to come. And fine, MPs who stayed away, 50 MPs abstained, some of whom just won't have been able to be there, but a lot have abstained. One sitting current whip-holding Labour MP rebelled. But MPs who are forced through the lobby in support of the government, some of whom reported to have tears in their eyes, etc., they're in the right lobby today, but that is burning up political capital in the coming months and years they are going to need. And you saw that in the coalition. It's very hard to hold your movement behind you. Unions coming out against them, MPs, ministers clearly unhappy. So they won. But each little bit of this is government, it's attrition, it slowly costs you and started to chip away already.
Yeah, it's certainly, nearly scores threw themselves into the Red Army's trenches, if I can put it that way. But does the government fundamentally want to be seen as George Osborne 2.0 here? And that's the way they're starting to be billed. We haven't even had the budget.
Yeah, they definitely don't want to be seen as George Osborne, and I think they've actually reacted quite defensively to that sort of critique, which is, you're just the Tories, but a bit nicer. And I don't think that, to be fair...
Well, it's nothing to do with being the Tories, it's about saying exactly the same things, isn't it?
Well, it's about taking the same strategy, fiscally, that George Osborne and David Cameron took in 2010, i.e. a strategy of fiscal conservatism. Now, to be fair to them, they're not doing what the Conservatives did. We saw successive Conservative chancellors actually take benefits and tax credits away from some of the poorest households with children and actually deliver tax cuts, very expensive tax cuts that disproportionately went to the top half of the distribution. So that distributionally was very, very bad for the lowest income households. But there are some shades of that here, which is what Labour MPs are worried about. And I think the debate in the Labour Party is, OK, we ran on a platform of fiscal conservatism in the general election. What does that mean when we actually get into government? What does it mean in terms of how much we have to cut back because things are worse when we get into government than we thought they were? And who should bear that cost? And the thing is, when you take something like winter fuel payment, I think there's a lot of agreement across the piece, actually, that the very wealthiest pensioners don't really need this payment. The question is, how do you means test it and how much money do you save? So I think there's a lot of Labour MPs who'd have been quite comfortable if you'd said, the top sort of 40% of pensioners aren't going to get this payment. I think people would have felt better about that. The issue is that there's quite a harsh cut-off with this policy. Now, going forwards, and this is what The Guardian's focusing on, interestingly, as Mark says they've won this vote, but there are going to be calls from backbenchers for support for those pensioners who aren't well off, but who just don't make the pension credit threshold, or who, even worse, are eligible for means-tested pension credit but aren't claiming it.
The pension credit has a horrible cliff edge.
It does.
And loads of people don't claim it, but if they all did claim it, this would be a loss leader. And that's the accusation we heard from Mel Stride, for the opposition today.
It is. It's a really difficult one, because I think Rachel Reeves, if she was here, she would say, we need to give a tough message as a Labour government. The economic inheritance is dire, and I'm not going to be borrowing more.
That's making people snooze. I mean, literally, people can't bear hearing that anymore.
I'm just giving you what you...
I know, but I just wonder when they start putting a full stop at the end of that, because people have already had enough of it.
Well, I think the problem is, OK, for Labour is that they could... I do think that voters know that the Conservatives are partially to blame for the economic situation as it stands, and we saw that in the general election result. The thing is, in 5 years' time, they're not going to be blaming the Conservatives for where the country is. And the risk for Labour is, what is their plan for growth? Personally, I don't think fiscal conservatism cuts it in terms of delivering growth for the country. If the economy is not doing significantly better, I think, by the time of the next election, I think Labour probably still will win.
People aren't looking at the next election, they're looking at Christmas, and they're looking at whether they can pay their energy bills, and they're going up by 10%. That's the problem they've got. We know that pensions are going up. We heard today £460 a year from April. That misses the winter, obviously. Indexed to wages and inflation. The Office for National Statistics announcing that average earnings rose by 4% year on year in the 3 months to July. So does that mean they're going up, by that amount? Is it September that they set these figures? So, so great news eventually, but you've still got to get through the winter.
Yes, and if you're a new MP, if you've just arrived, you've achieved... people have to work incredibly hard to become MPs. It's their big dream to get to sit on those green benches. They've had this amazing election result. They've achieved this bit of the dream. And what's happening now is reality starts to bite, that this is really hard. Your mailbag is not filling with people saying, I'm looking forward to £460 on my pension in April or March. It's filling with people writing to you right now about this, particularly
people on the front page of the Daily Express, for example, united we stand in winter fuel fight. That means the fight's going to carry on.
Indeed, and in that photo you have a couple of Tory leadership contenders, Tory MPs, Nigel Farage, the Green Party. There's a lot of kind of clamour about this, and it's very easy, as the opposition will, all opposition parties will understandably do, they'll oppose, they'll hammer you over this. And it's quite interesting to think about the ideology. We used to hear a lot from MPs and campaigns now in government that, you remember the phrase, austerity is an ideological choice, not a necessity? We don't hear that very much anymore. And their message now is, understandably, this is a necessity, not an ideological choice after all, because you're the government, you're charged with actually balancing the books and making this stuff work out. George Osborne's split in the coalition years was 80% spending cuts, 20% tax rises. That was his stated strategy. Budgets varied a lot around whether he kept to that at different times. We'll find out from Rachel Reeves. Maybe it'll be 50-50, maybe some other balance. But it's really difficult. You know, Conservative MPs who are much more on board with the necessity of austerity in 2010 than I would say a lot of Labour MPs are now, they all struggled to hold the line with their constituents, with their pet topics. This is going to get a lot harder, a lot more bumpy before it gets easier.
And in the meantime, prisoner release, again, they're blaming the Conservatives for this point, and they possibly Rishi Sunak bottled this decision before the election, that it was always going. They'd already started cutting it, haven't they? Daily Mail says...
I think this is one situation where it's completely...
Let's just look at the picture, though, in the Daily Mail. Cork popping, champagne bubbling. Who voted for all of this?
And their sentence, they opened Keir Starmer mugged pensioners and freed muggers yesterday. I mean, that's not something you want to hear in Downing Street. You don't want that in the Prime Minister's roundup.
You definitely don't want prisoners coming out and saying, I'm a Labour voter for life now, which is what one of them has done. So,
well, some are saying I'm sleeping on the street and I'll be back in soon, too, to be fair.
Absolutely. And I do think that this is actually one case where it is entirely fair to blame the last government for this, because this prisons crisis has been years in the making. We've not built enough prisons, and we have underinvested in the prison service. We made a lot of experienced prison officers redundant about, sort of 2015, 2016. You've got prisons that are quite dangerous, that are underfunded, and we've been locking up people for longer. Now, that might be the right decision for some crimes, but you've got to make sure that there's space for these people. So this is a problem.
This is the problem of heading back into austerity, that where is the money to stop, the prisons crisis, the NHS crisis?
Absolutely. Well, this is why it comes back to growth in the economy, because Rachel Reeves' answer to this is always, we don't have the money to spend right now, but we're going to grow the economy and that will deliver the tax receipts we need to spend. But if that growth doesn't come, these are all very, very difficult questions. So
I very much agree that this problem was established and created under the previous government. The fact is, didn't build enough prisons. The rehabilitation is failing, has been for a very long time. We do more of it. We have people who go into our prisons clean and come out with drug habits. That's a clear sign of a really disastrous system. And there's, if you want to understand one reason why Rishi Sunak went early for the election, stuff like this is part of it. He would be deciding. But I've got to say,
just quickly, Mark, because
But the new government, we could build Nightingale hospitals. Why can't we set up some Nightingale prisons? Why can't we find some Bibi Stockholms and put prisoners there? I mean, it doesn't... I think it feels like they've moved quite swiftly to release, to me.
No, I've got time. We're not going back Bibi Stockholming on this point. Run out of time for the moment. Stay tuned, though. Lots more still to come, including this critical question. Could the US allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles to strike Russia? Discussing that next.
They've pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'm going to have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here.
They're coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake might all be finished, I don't know.
say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Here we go. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. We're still debating the previous section. It's been a hard 3 minutes. Anyway, still here, as you can see, Mark Wallace and Sonia Sodha. We'll have a chance to talk more later, obviously. Anyway, really big story in the Times, which is that there are things coalescing together. There is a joint trip between the US and UK to Kyiv. We know the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is heading to Washington at the back end of this week. Is there an announcement brewing? And, Mark, Kyiv to get the go-ahead to strike deep into Russia. Finally, the suggestion is that they might be able to use Western missiles to strike Russia, which has been halted so far. Is this what we're expecting?
Yes, and let's hope it happens and it happens soon, because the whole story of this war, since the end of the first week, has been Ukraine saying, look what we can do with what we have, look what we could do with what we need, and America and NATO, and in some cases Britain, but particularly Germany and others, dragging their feet and making the Ukrainians, essentially saying to the Ukrainians, in not so many words, but you have to bleed more until we're willing to do this. And they need to get on with it. It's interesting, Kiev, the Ukrainians have launched their own drone strikes on Moscow to illustrate what they can do. Yeah. Imagine what they should be given this.
Warehouses building drones. I mean, it's truly, I think, a frightening prospect for modern warfare. Daily Telegraph also leading on this. President poised to lift Ukraine missile ban. And the Ukrainians would say, that's not it, that's on the front page of the Telegraph. The Ukrainians would say, if you'd given us what you've given us now, F-16s, Abrams, Bradleys, Challengers, the prospect of long-range missiles into Russia, look what we could have done 2 years ago.
Absolutely. And I think those are some of the difficult questions that need to be asked of the West strategy, actually. And the thing that has prompted this at this moment in time is that Iran have just supplied some new missiles to Russia, which everyone is expecting Russia to use. And that sort of prompted this kind of potential change in policy for the West. But the fact of the matter is that the UK has supplied Ukraine with long-range missiles. The issue is that they require some US technology as well in order to go into Russia. And it's the US who's been holding back. Now, you can see why there are arguments for holding back, which is that
the question is, are we at war with Russia?
Exactly,
that's
exactly. So the US and the UK and France and Germany are very, very nervous about doing something that could trigger Putin using strategic tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine and could ultimately catapult us all into World War III. But the current situation that we're in is not really risk-free either, and is, has potential long-term ramifications. So I agree. I really do hope that Ukraine gets what it needs. And the key point is that this would be using missiles to hit Russian military targets to prevent Russia's capacity to strike Ukraine using long-range missiles way beyond the front line, which is what it's doing.
Which they use to kill Ukrainian civilians.
Exactly.
And it's also this is also being spurred, of course, by the threat of Trump. So this is about the US is moving. The US administration is moving. There's a lot of pressure in the US to move now. To try and minimise the risk.
We haven't done any of the stories. I'm very going to quickly go. Jenrick and Badenoch surge in leaders' race was the story we were going to do, which is your big subject, obviously, and Which calling for Oasis ticket refunds. We'll have to talk more later.
See them later.
Oh, my goodness, yes, we will. See you at 11:30 tonight. Thank you very much indeed. Plenty more still to come in the next part of our programme, including Yalda's interview with Antony Blinken. Don't go away.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your